Show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is Trucking with Authority. I'm your host, Kenny Long, and for the next hour, consider me your navigator on your journey to success in business, especially the trucking business. We're trying it again live here on YouTube again today. I got to tell you, this is going to take some getting used to. I find this platform much more difficult to use than what I'm used to. Definitely not user-friendly compared to the other several systems that I use, so we're going to work on that. Got a lot going on today. We are also streaming live on Blog Talk Radio. If you'd like to join the call, if you have anything you'd like to ask or add to the show, dial the number at the bottom of your screen, 917-889-9924. Looks like we have some live callers on the phone lines already. If you're on the phone, press number 1 on your keypad and it will raise your hand. Elizabeth is in the other room screening calls. Anything you'd like to add or ask tonight, the show is yours. We want to talk more about freight negotiations. Loss aversion is the topic tonight. We spent some time last week talking about sorry, let's get these bugs worked out of here. We spent some time last week talking about the ZOPA, Zone of Possible Agreement. We spent some time the week prior talking about the anchor effect in negotiations. And what it really all comes down to is everything in negotiation, everything is psychological. Because negotiation is simply communication. When you're communicating with somebody, there's something going on between you, the two people, the words you use, the tone you use, your body language, and even if you're over the phone, your body language tends to show through between just speaking to somebody in a monotone voice or trying to use some inflection in your words to make your points. Even if you're watching me on the video now, you'll see I'm using body language as I speak to you here on the phone. And this stuff, even if you can't see me, you can hear my body language, believe it or not. But one of the other psychological aspects of a negotiation is loss aversion. Now, what exactly is loss aversion? Now, I was going to try to have a coin here. Let's see. Now, I've got a coin. Let me ask you, if I flip this coin, it's a quarter, heads on one side, tails on the other. And if I was to flip this coin and bet you that if it lands on heads, I will give you $100. But if it lands on tails, you have to give me $100. What would you think about that? Most people, if that was the case, would say that they would prefer not to play the game at all. Now, if I was to say that if I would give you $200, but if it lands on tails, you have to give me $100. The risk is getting a little more worth it. The odds are a little better. There's a good chance you could win some money. Well, statistically speaking, most people would still choose not to play, even if they could potentially win almost twice as much. Let's up the odds a little more. Up the ante, rather. Let's say I would give you $300 if it lands on heads, but you have to give me $100 if it lands on tails. What would you choose at that point? Now, this is where statistically we start to see people make different decisions. Statistically, at that point, usually when the reward is about 2.5 times greater than the risk. So $250, $300 versus your $100 potential loss, most people at that point would opt into the game. It's a simple coin toss, but most people, even if they could potentially win twice as much as they would lose, would still back away. 2.5, 3 times or more, that's when most people decide mentally, subconsciously, without really thinking too hard about it, most people at that point decide that the risk is worth the reward. That principle is loss aversion. It's actually pretty good odds that you could win $100 flipping this coin. You could also lose, but for $200, that's a pretty good reward. Most people still opt out. Now let's change this up a little bit. Let's say that you had a potential buyer for a truck you're selling, an old, used, beat-up truck. You list it for $10,000. Somebody comes to buy the truck from you, sight unseen, and they say, absolutely, I will give you, without fail, no question about it, I will give you $9,500. I'll wire you the money right now before I even come look at it. I'll take the truck. Sold. Then you get another call. The next call says, I will pay you $10,000 full price for your truck. Pay you full price, but I have to come see it first. And if I see anything that I don't like, anything at all, I'm not buying it whatsoever. Absolutely will not buy it whatsoever. Now you're faced with a situation, you're going back out on the road, you have to sell the truck by tomorrow, no questions asked, it's got to be moved, otherwise the city's going to come tow it, impound it, you've got all kinds of mess on your hands. So you are faced between a rock and a hard place. You sell it 100%, absolutely you will get $9,500 for it, or you lose everything because the city's going to tow it away, or you take a chance at maybe getting your $10,000. 95% of your asking price is 100% guaranteed, and it's an unknown to get full price. What would you do? Most people, again, statistically, if faced with some type of a scenario like that, would still avoid the risk of losing everything and take 95%. They'll take the $9,500 and they'll walk away from the full $10,000 price. The principle behind that is called loss aversion. This happens subconsciously. This happens without you thinking about it. And the question is why? And if you think about it in the logical sense, why do we as humans, as animals, why do we try to avoid risk? Why do we avoid risk even though our potential gains might be lower if we avoid the risk? Why do we do that? And if you think hard about it, it simply goes back to the lizard brain. Your animal instincts. Your 4 F's. Your fight, flight, flee, and fornication. Your 4 F's. This goes into your fighting or fleeing. Why do you avoid risk? Because you are trying to survive. You take the best opportunity for the least amount of risk. That is what most people do. It's a huge, huge, huge problem for people that deal with investments. Most investors will tell you, most coaches in investing will tell you that when you're at a younger age, you take the higher risk for a little more reward. And as you get older, you can't afford to take as much risk, so you take less risk for a little more reward. Rather, less risk for an equal reward. And you do that because you're afraid of losing everything. Now, some people that are able to overcome that psychological risk versus reward limitation are able to invest and take the risk. And it's something that most billionaires and multimillionaires in the world have done. They've made real estate investments that most people wouldn't take the risk on. They've made business investments that most people wouldn't take the risk on because there was a chance that they could lose everything. Lose everything or become the next Donald Trump. Become the president, right? Lose it all, be homeless, gain everything. Most people tend to take the path of least resistance and try to play the safe game. Play the long game, long-term investing. It can be good. It's safe. It's safe. But when you're talking about a freight negotiation, a one-time transactional freight negotiation, what do you do? What game do you play? Do you play the long game? It's hard to do that when you're talking about a single transaction. So a lot of times loss aversion comes up when you're talking about freight negotiations. It looks like we have we've got several callers on the line. We have a lot of people streaming on YouTube. I believe Elizabeth is out there streaming, sharing this out in all the Facebook groups. If you all could, YouTube is a new platform for me. I'm still learning the ins and outs of it. It was a little difficult getting the show set up today, so if you could, please share this out. Like, subscribe, hit the little bell so you get the notifications. I will be releasing more and more videos on this platform, but I've got to learn the tips and tricks and how to make this work. So in a freight negotiation, how can you overcome the bully between your ears? How can you overcome the lizard brain and make the right decision? Now, there's two ways this can be played. You can take advantage of the loss aversion subconscious mind of the person sitting across the table from you or on the other end of the phone. You can take advantage of that. Or you can prevent them from taking advantage of you because you have to be aware of it. Now, a few things that you can do. First of all, be super, super, super duper confident when you walk into any negotiation. Talked about this on the every show. Talk about this all the time. Know your numbers. After my show last week, one of the members in the Rates and Lanes Facebook group posted the discussion and the poll, rather. What's most important? Knowing your numbers, being good at negotiating, driving the truck, and so forth. And a lot of people said negotiating and better business practices were number one. But let me tell you something. You cannot negotiate. You cannot be a good negotiator and overcome all these psychological principles that I'll be teaching you over the next few weeks. You cannot do it if you don't know your numbers. You have to know your numbers to be really good at negotiating. So number one, to overcome your psychological limitation of loss aversion, number one is know your numbers inside, outside, backwards, and forwards. Know your numbers. Know what you need to make. Know your ZOPA. Know the range. Understand the lanes, the market. Join the Facebook group, the Trucking Rates and Lanes group, and get into some discussions there. Look at the DAT trend lines. Look at the hot market maps. Look at the rates and lanes information that are provided there. I'm hoping that we'll have some representatives from FreightWaves Sonar on soon that can discuss some of the information and the statistics they have. All of this can be used to be confident in your negotiations. And confidence is the number one way to overcome loss aversion. You get confidence by knowing your numbers, most importantly. So know your numbers, be confident, do your research. So that's number two. Do all of your research and understand it so you can build up that confidence. When you enter the negotiation, And excuse me while I'm scrolling through the comments as well at the same time. And checking the phone lines. If you have any questions or comments, again, dial the number at the bottom of your screen. Phone lines are open for the entire length of the show. I made sure that we will not have any phone issues tonight. Call the number 917-889-9924. Press 1 on your keypad. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about this. And I was scrolling through these questions as well. It's a little distracting for me to have all this stuff going on. Again, I'm still getting used to the YouTube platforms here, so bear with me on that. But I see some questions coming in, and I'll get to some of that here in just a few minutes. Okay. So, we know our numbers. We've done the research. We've built up our confidence. We've set our anchor. You've got your counteroffer, and you've got a choice. You can accept a counteroffer that's not quite what you would like to have. You can accept an offer that's lower than your Zopa. Or you can walk away from the deal. They're not going to give it to you. You take the offer or you don't take the load. Unfortunately, people that don't know their numbers, they're not confident, what do? They accept that low rate offer. They'll split the difference. They'll take the lesser of the two evils. Instead of taking the risk of losing the opportunity, losing that load, especially if they think that they need the money because they don't know their numbers and they don't know any better, they'll take the risk of walking away over negotiating harder and trying to get their money. So overcome it by being confident with all of the research and statistics to back up what you need to know. All right, so the other way that you can use loss aversion in your favor is to play it against the other side. And you use that with some simple techniques. Well, I've talked about it in past videos. I've done complete negotiation videos of all the basic haggling techniques that you can use. One of them is set a deadline. So you're in a freight negotiation. Somebody offers you a good load. You go back and forth. You've anchored the rate. You've gone back and forth, and you're about to make a deal. And they want you to come down just a little bit more, maybe $50, $100 from your rate. What can you say to play on their subconscious loss aversion? Look, buddy, it's 4 o'clock. You need me there by 5. I can do this for my rate. But if we don't do this now, this load's not going to get moved. All of a sudden, they have the pressure, not thinking about the rate so much as if we don't lock this deal in, we lose this truck. The load doesn't get moved. And he's right. We've got an hour. If I don't get this truck, this load doesn't get moved. I could make an extra $50 or $100 on this load if I could maybe get somebody to move it at my rate, my $50, $100 less than that driver is offering. But if I don't seal the deal right now, I'm not going to make anything because this driver is not going to be able to make it to my pickup, my shipper in time, my customer. And I'll have a customer that's upset. I'm not going to make any money on it. What do? Let's book it. I'm afraid to lose this truck. Let's book it. Now, you as the driver, you've propositioned them and you've given them the rate and you've said, look, I'm not going to be able to make it if we don't book this and get the paperwork done right now. That sets the ball rolling in their subconscious mind of loss aversion, and they'll commit to your rate. Once you do that, and if you know that that is the tactic that you're using, at that point you have to stand strong and firm and lean on your confidence and let them cave to your number. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen if you're thousands of dollars apart. You're not even in that same Zopa. But if you know that you're confident, this is what that load is worth, You know that this driver, this broker can make this happen. Stand strong. Get that extra $50 or $100 because you know it. You're confident. You know this load's worth it. Make them cave to your loss aversion, not the other way around. Now, there's some other ways that loss aversion plays into the freight negotiation process. Sometimes it plays on your principal negotiation rather than your, your principal negotiation rather than your interests in negotiation. In other words, if you are standing on your principles, one of the principles being, I will not take freight for less than $3 a mile. I won't turn my key for less than $3 a mile. And you're in Miami, Florida. And you negotiate from that principle standpoint. There's an issue of loss aversion there. Loss aversion plays on your principles very, very strong. Because you're not thinking about the money you might make or the money you'll lose. You are afraid you're going to lose your manlyhood, lose your, and for the females, your womanlyhood, I don't know, is that a thing? But you're going to lose your own self-respect. If you cave to your principles, you're afraid you will lose that. That is loss aversion as well. And again, how do you overcome that? You understand when you go into South Florida, you know what the market is. You make your plan going in. You decide that you're going to take $1 a mile, $1.50, $2, whatever it is, and you get away from that principle-based negotiation. Negotiate on your points of interest, not on your principles. You can't lose if you don't have the principles there in place. Make sound, solid business decisions and weigh the risk versus reward. When you start making logical decisions, and I always use South Florida as an example because obviously that's the most extreme market. When you start weighing the risk versus reward, yes, I could make $500 from Miami to Orlando. It's about $2 a mile, but I don't turn my key for less than $3 a mile. And in the Midwest, you might be able to get your rate, but you're not going to get it in Florida. But because you're standing on your principles, you won't take that, would otherwise be a pretty decent load. If you understand what the market is like and understand you're not going to get your 3, understand that $500 is all profit if you've made the right arrangements going into South Florida to begin with. Take your backhaul with you. Anything you get out is profit. And you have to weigh the risk versus reward there. But weigh it logically, not emotionally, subconsciously. Weigh the wait times. Weigh the distance and the fuel use. Weigh the cheap freight, heavy paper versus if they're shipping gold bars. What is the commodity? What is important to the shipper, the receiver? You have to weigh all the options of the load, but don't negotiate from a principle standpoint or you lose every time to your loss aversion. You don't want to lose to a made-up principle, a psychological limit that you've put on yourself. So be careful when you get into some type of negotiation and you are more afraid of losing your own self-respect than making a profit. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is business. People will do anything for money if they're not negotiating from a standpoint of standing on their principles. So that is loss aversion. I'm going to do a little bit more detail in that on another video. I see I've got a lot of questions already popping up. Looks like I do have a caller on the line, and as soon as Elizabeth screens that one, I'll bring the caller on the air. So hint, Elizabeth, let's get on that. And let's get some questions over here from the YouTube stream. G-Man says, Kenny, G-I-Man? Maybe it's G-I-Man? Kenny, can you give your opinion on glider trucks? Yeah, I can give my opinion on glider trucks. I believe that the heyday of glider trucks has come and gone, in my opinion. If you're driving a glider truck now and you've had it a few years, I think you got into that market in the right time. But at this point, glider trucks should come with an antique license plate. Most glider trucks are using engines that are 20 years old, or engine technology that's more than 20 years old. They had a period of time where it made sense to buy a glider. There used to be a way to avoid the FET tax. There used to be some mileage benefits, some emissions control benefits. But the way the market is now, you're dealing with old equipment. They stick it in a new shell. They put a fancy new suit on it, but it's still an old pig, rebuilt, and a rebuilt engine is not going to be as good as a brand new manufactured engine. But at this point, every engine in a glider has been rebuilt, and the parts are getting scarce. So a rebuilt engine is going to have possibly third-party parts. They won't even be manufacturer-designated parts. It won't be OEM parts. Gliders are sketchy right now. There are actually more problems with gliders currently than there are with brand new trucks. So be very, very careful with gliders. I think there was a time and place for them. From 2010 or so through 2013, 14, gliders had a place in the market. We were still dealing with relatively available parts, good shops that could work on them. The alternative of the emissions control trucks were very unreliable. JD Power and Associates once did an article and showed a 2002 model truck right off the line compared to a 2012, I believe was when the article came out. The 2002, right off the showroom floor, had about a 5% chance of having 13 or more days downtime in the first year. The 2012 model year truck had about a 48% chance of roughly 2 weeks a year in the shop. That has changed from 2014 on. The reliability of the trucks, the fuel economy of the trucks has just grown exponentially, where you might take a fairly aerodynamic glider, maybe a Cascadia glider or a Columbia glider. You might be able to put 7.5 to 8 miles per gallon out of it. You're going to get 8 to 9 miles a gallon right out of the box with the Cascadia. You're going to get longer life, lower maintenance, but this is from 2014 and up. I would definitely not compare a glider for that time frame of 2010 to 2012, 13. 2014 and up, I would opt for a full brand new emissions control truck. Make sure it's been well taken care of. If you're buying used, there's still a bit of a market there for a used glider, but again, you're buying a used truck that had already been a rebuilt Frankenstein vehicle, and you don't know what you're going to get. So in my opinion, if you want to save the money, if you're looking for the old school reliability, if you can find an older used truck that has not yet been tampered with too much and rebuild it, refurbish it, I think that might be a better option than buying some of the half worn out gliders. So that's my opinion on the glider. Can you possibly do a video on the DAT board of freight in and out of Minnesota? I could probably do that. I won't be able to do it on this video, but I will work on something like that in the future. I've got some things planned to work on with the DAT, the new hot market maps from DAT, with some rates and lanes information. I could certainly share some information there. I will work on that on a future video. And it looks like he's got some help in the comments already. Okay, so somebody with Christopher Maddox, Christopher Sean Maddox was saying sell it for $9,500, and they're referring to my question of if you could get full price for $10,000 or you could get $9,500. If you don't take one deal or the other, you lose every opportunity. What do? You take the $9,500. Statistically, that is loss aversion. Be very, very careful. And most people would avoid the risk for the extra gain unless, and the magic number tends to be statistically, unless the gain is 2.5 or more times the amount of potential loss. So again, I started out with the coin toss. 100 to 100, not playing the game. 100 to 200, it's on the fence. 250 to 3, now we're talking. But most people, until that point is about 2.5 to 3 times more than the potential loss, most people will opt for less risk. And if there's issues with the buffering of the video, let me know. I see some people are talking about that. Big Rich says, I speak of your show all the time. I learned a lot from you before I even got my truck. I appreciate that. I've been doing this show for a long time. I was streaming simultaneously on Facebook and YouTube. I'm trying to move exclusively just to YouTube. I'm not 100% certain if this is the right platform or not, but I gave it a shot, and everybody said I should give it a little time. We will see. I'm not finding it quite as user-friendly as the way I used to do it, and that was streaming on multiple platforms at once. So we'll see how it works. Elizabeth says it is not buffering here in the office. And Patriot Star in the comments, that is Elizabeth. That is our carrier, and she's on the other platform here. I love Sonar. I watch their weekly market report too. Their service isn't really helpful at the stage I'm at right now, but plan to purchase it when I expand. I actually talked to the reps over at Sonar just today. There was some things that came up from the Sonar, and it looks like we're buffering even on my end. It's kind of crazy. But we talked to the people at Sonar just today. I'm going to try to get somebody, a rep from Sonar. It's interesting, some of the statistics that they get. And they compile information that is relatively unique and new to the market and what we're used to. I like that they are able to compile outside information, stuff that we haven't really looked at as an indicator of the truckload market before. So I think that it'll be beneficial once they really gear up, and they're looking at offering a plan that is Big Rich says he's at the stage he's at right now. He plans to purchase it when he expands. They are looking at a plan that is more fitting for the small carrier. So I actually talked to them today. Hopefully they'll have more details on that. But what's interesting is, what's really kind of cool is there was some articles posted earlier today, and some of the people that are from the popular load boards also contribute to some of the FreightWaves Sonar articles. And there was some conflicts there because apparently the load board information was so far lacking behind that the articles, while they were written only one day apart, were very, very contradictory. And it turns out the load board information was completely irrelevant. So the article was removed from their website, it appears. So the Sonar information is really cool stuff. It's really cool what they're able to do with that. I've been following them for a long time. I went to the Transparency 18 conference. I was on stage to speak there. We had a panel with myself, Chad Bollett, and Pete Emheiser. We're all on the panel. And we were talking about technology and how it affects us small companies, small carriers, small brokers. And it's really interesting to see how all of these things really do affect us directly, and the information that we can gather from it. Things such as, and I'll talk about this more when I have them on the show, but things such as you can identify not just detention in certain markets, not just detention at certain customers, but they were able to identify a detention issue at a shipper, at the location, which building, at the specific dock door. Right down to the dock door, they were able to contact that shipper and figure out what it was. And the shipper said, you know what? Now that you say that, we realize what the problem is. And they were able to fix that detention issue right down literally to the department and the dock door of that facility. Now that is pretty cool stuff. And if you are able to spend some time with that product and do that kind of market research to be able to identify market trends, identify different shippers, different commodities, other segments of the industry and how they may change what you're doing, because it's not just trucking specific. You're talking about intermodal and rail and ocean shipping, and you're talking about truckload of every segment, your market information, fuel use, the hours of service, the ELD telematics, GPS location information. I mean, all of this stuff combined it's crazy, the type of things when you start putting together hypothesis of what happens when you have a certain amount of fuel burn in a certain location, and why is that? And you start to see, well, it's because we have more trucks in this area, or we have detention at a certain dock because there's more out of service areas here. I actually had another meeting with a representative from my insurance company. They are able to very, very, very specifically from ELD and hours of service data directly correlate that to, and as much as you want to argue against it, directly correlate that to crash statistics. I mean, they hold the graphs one over the other, and it's almost the same line on the graph. It's unbelievable. And when you can take that kind of information on a massive scale, the whole country, and be able to even zero it in on just one small, tight little location, one city block, one building, one dock door at that building, and you're able to get all that information, that is pretty powerful stuff. And I think that there will be huge things once more and more people learn how to use the data. This data was, I mean, huge corporations, huge multi-billion-dollar logistics companies have compiled this within their own systems, and they were able to do really cool stuff with their own in-house data. But that type of stuff was not available to us small 1, 10, 20, even 100, 300 truck corporation companies. It just wasn't available. But now FreightWaves and Sonar are able to put some of that together. And it is an expensive product, but they offer a lot of articles, a lot of great information for free. So check that stuff out, FreightWaves. I don't get paid. They're not a sponsor. I have not collected a dime ever from any of my so-called sponsors. I've found deals to help you guys get discounts and different programs, but I have never made a dime off of any of this stuff so far. Well, let me take that back. I will take that back because I don't want to be called a liar. KeepTruckin. I do think that they are one of the better ELDs, and you get $25 off if you sign up through my link, and I get $25 if you sign up and you pay for the full year. So I have had bonuses from them, and anybody can get that type of bonus if you want to set up your own referral program. It's not a secret. So I've made money from that. But other than that, I have not made any money from any of these other companies that I've recommended. And that's FreightWaves and Sonar. That's DAT. And I have a referral link, and someday I might one day get some monies off of some of this stuff. But so far, I've never collected a dime, and I'm still supporting it. The TruckLogix is another one that I think is a great system for tracking your numbers. I don't get a dime from them, but I still think they're great. QuickBooks, obviously, is one that I don't get a dime from, but I think they are absolutely the most powerful and most recognized accounting program out there. All of these systems, and there's links to most of this stuff in the description below. Check all of that stuff out. What events do you recommend to go to expand our knowledge more? Arturo's World asks, what events do you recommend to expand our knowledge more? I haven't announced the actual dates yet, but I will be putting on another event. I did one last October in Kansas City. We had a fantastic turnout. We had 3 days, hardcore, educational, business planning, negotiations, a lot of it's just personal development. I'm talking a lot about psychology here and how to better yourself and be prepared for negotiations. And if you're going to have that mindset, you really got to start on yourself. So some personal development, goal setting, business planning, business development. We had accountants out there. We had some of the top mechanics in the country. Of course, we had Chad Hone from Alignment Solutions out there checking alignments on trucks. we had I said accountants. We also had a financial planner. We had a factoring company, and when I bring in people to be sponsors to an event like this, I tell them up front, you cannot sell from stage. This is not going to be a sales pitch. So I had a factoring company, and everybody knows a factoring company is all about a sales pitch. This was literally an hour presentation of why you should never use a factoring company. And this was my rep from a factoring company telling you all of the red flags in factoring contracts, all of the bad loopholes that factoring agreements will get you caught up into, the fees that are involved, all of those things. A factoring company rep came out, told you all of that, would not even give his name on stage, name or company contact, because I told him do not sell from stage. I said, look, Josh, give them your information. He threw that out there. That is where you learn. You do not want to learn from salespeople. You do not want to learn from people trying to upsell you on the next best thing. I'm not trying to sell you on this event. I would love for you all to come out, but what you want to do is try to find solutions and find people that are not just trying to tell you that their product is the best thing because they make money on it. I've already told you that I made a little bit of money doing that, but really it was just barely a break even by the time I paid for the event center and all the materials and so forth. But overall, you know, the education is what I'm here for. The next one will not be this year, not 2018. It's going to be 2019. I'm shooting for spring. I don't have dates locked in yet. So let's just lock that in. Sometime in the spring, pay attention for news as it comes out. Hoping for Kansas City again, or maybe even Omaha, Nebraska. We're looking at doing it possibly in Kansas City again, but I am looking at other locations around the country. Probably not Omaha, Nebraska. To me, the facilities, you know, there was Mid-America Center in Council Bluffs was a possibility last year, and I just don't like that type of venue. It's just too big, and the majority of an event like that, the majority of benefit comes from the interaction between everybody else that attends. So I look for places that, yes, they have the room for the trucks and they've got plenty of room for the event that we're going to put on, but I want to have the social interaction between everybody once the event's over. So we're looking at possibly Kansas City again. We did it at Harrah's in Kansas City last year. We may look at that possibility again, but I am looking at other locations. I am looking at possibly trying one in Florida, looking at also Atlanta or Charlotte, and maybe even as far out as Las Vegas. But Las Vegas may be a year or two down the road. We'll see. And Columbia Glider Day says, you drive you was an excellent experience. It was the first one he did. Next one will be better knowing what worked and what didn't. And that's absolutely true. I have a lot of new material that I would love to include. A lot of things that I did that worked, but I could improve on. So absolutely, we were testing the waters, and you know, absolutely, I think I'm going to put on. I mean, I'm going to knock people's socks off with what I've got planned next time. I promise you. Okay, back to trucking questions. Kenny, I have a question for Scott Dar asks. Kenny, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on a Kenworth T60 as a truck for a first-time owner-operator? It's Cummins powered. 660 is a pretty decent truck. It's solid. I don't know what year you're looking at. Some of the ISX engines had some carbon packing issues. The cylinder, as it was going up and down, carbon packs around the rings, and the rings break or become unseated, and you get a lot of blow-by and oil consumption. There was actually some recalls. They were doing a lot of overhauls under warranty on those engines, so it's hard to say. 2014 or newer, I believe they managed to get most of the bugs worked out of that. It is a good truck. It's aerodynamic, should get some good fuel economy. I don't know your operation, but if you know, you've got all the aerodynamics you need to pull either a van. It works great in a flatbed or step deck operation as well. It is a good all-around truck. Keep in mind, it's the narrow cab Kenworth. And Kenworth, in my opinion, completely opinionated, Kenworth is not what it used to be. It's, you know, they're still plastic trucks. And it's really what's under the hood of all these that count. And I think in my opinion, the Detroit engine would be my preference, which really leaves you with the only choice of Freightliner or Western Star. But second to that, obviously the Cummins engine. I would absolutely avoid anything. I would not get one necessarily if it had the PACCAR engine in it. I've heard good and bad about the PACCAR engine, but I don't have any experience with it. I would avoid it. I would also, and that was the next question, how do you feel about the PACCAR? I would avoid it. Again, I've heard people delete them. They're okay, but I wouldn't delete an engine right now. And then, of course, the Max Force run, if it's a Max Force. I think they phased out that the bad model of Max Force. The newer ones apparently are basically a Cummins-designed engine, from what I understand. So, and I'll be pulling either a dry van or reefer. If you get a T660, they're usually like a mid-roof type design. If you're pulling a dry van or reefer, get the roof fairing because the fuel economy gains are huge there. All right, let's go over here to, all right, here we go. Let me go to Dave in Connecticut. There we go. Dave, what's on your mind?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You kind of threw me for the loop when you started talking about gliders. I'm kind of on the same page with you with the new gliders, but I still think a used glider is a good investment at this point here because you know, it was from the batches of the engines that only been rebuilt possibly once. You know, 500,000, 600,000 miles on the truck. So you think a used glider would be a bad truck at this point?
It would depend on the specific truck. I would run all the tests. I want a blow-by test. I want an ECM printout. I want to know exactly all the history of it. Where was the truck put together? Where was it built? You know, was it in a mass-produced facility where they kind of know what they're doing, like Fitzgerald or Harrison's? But, you know, some of the trucks that came out of some of those facilities had some major issues as well. I would check to see you know, do some reviews, you know, Google searches on the year that truck was put together. For example, Harrison's had a batch of engines that were just absolutely horribly put together, and that was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, which is right in that time period that I think a used glider would be a good idea. But you're still looking at an engine that has been rebuilt at least once and is going to have 600,000 to 700,000 miles on the rebuild. So it's due for another rebuild at that point, in my opinion. Or you know, you got to start planning for it. You know, a million, 1.2 million out of a Series 60 was not unheard of out of a fresh engine, but a rebuild typically you're looking between 700,000 to 900,000, and maybe you get another million out of them at 1.1 million, 1.2 million, but that would have to be a very, very well built engine because there's other worn parts in there. So it's hit and miss. You know, you're looking at buying like I said, a Frankenstein truck, in my opinion. Now, I know we're on YouTube here, so you are Columbia Glider Dave. You have a Columbia Glider, but you have had it for a few years now. And I think when you bought yours, it made sense because we were still in that period of the new trucks aren't really proven yet. You know, that you are still the engine technology, like I said, now in 2018, if you're looking at 1998 engine, you're looking at 20-year-old engines. You know, you got that engine when you were still able to get parts. Wasn't a huge push to for all the rebuilds and everything else. Getting parts for those was for a while horrible. I have a Series 60 in one of my trucks and had it rebuilt, and getting parts for it was like pulling teeth. I had to fly parts in from all over the country at one point. So if you have one that you bought a few years ago, like yourself, I think it was a good investment then. I would not buy one today unless I did a lot of checkups on it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. If it came out of a fleet and it was a factory rebuild, I'd be thinking about buying that glider. I'm looking at that new Peterbilt, the Ultra Loft, as my next truck. That's probably 2-3 years down the road. Anyway, that was a left turn you took. You were talking about loss aversion at the beginning of the thing. Did you give any examples of that? I know I've got plenty. This week here, I was working on to the truck 263 all miles, and I was looking for. I didn't care if it was $1 a mile, a load that paid maybe, you know, $500 for whatever my deadhead was, I would have been happy. To me, that would have been like, I don't know what 80% of that is, and that would have been all profit. I couldn't find that load, so I wound up deadheading, and that knocked down my rate per mile for the week down to 203. But I would have taken $1 a mile to get to Joplin to get my belly boxes put in this week.
Well, that's a pretty good example. One of the common ones, and before I do a show like this, I do some research, and a lot of the articles that focus on this are talking about investments. And what investors oftentimes do is they focus on one investment that's risky. And they're so worried about that one investment that's risky that they start losing money on that investment and then forget about all the other investments they have that are doing great. They stop paying attention to them, and they try to reinvest that one risky investment and try to fix it. Meanwhile, all the other ones that they're ignoring that were making them money start to turn, and they start to lose money as well. And now you lose money across the board. That's a bad mistake that investors do. That's also something that I've noticed that drivers do. They're going to focus on that one load for the week and trying not to lower their rate per mile for the one load for that week. And, they'll focus on, like you said, if I would take $1 a mile, which makes sense, but it would keep your overall weekly rate per mile up. It's all profit. You focus on that one principal decision and don't take the load. And I remember there was a driver I was coaching a couple years ago. This was 2014. Last time we had like really good rates. And there was a team operation, and they loaded in Indiana, I believe it was, took a load down to Miami, and they're bragging about getting like almost $5 a mile. Crazy, crazy good money. But then they got stuck in that principle of I will not take cheap freight, and they probably could have got at that time a couple dollars a mile out. They could have done well, but it wasn't the $5 a mile that they could brag about. So they deadheaded out, and they kept deadheading and deadheading and deadheading, and they went almost all the way back to Indiana before they got their next load. So they took that $4.55 a mile, cut it in half. Now they're at $2.50 a mile. So you can't, be excited about $5 a mile now, because now you just did the whole thing for $2.50. Then they took a load that was pretty good, like $4 a mile down into Texas, and then got into Texas and deadheaded all the way back, up to somewhere in Oklahoma and whatever. And I ran it for the whole week or a couple weeks period and whatever it was, and they were talking about all the great money they made and all this money, but they wouldn't take those cheap loads. I'm going to avoid the cheap loads. I don't want the loss. But then when I showed them their overall rate, and this was when rates were similar to where they're at now. They were, like $2.40 a mile was the average going rate at the time, $2.30, $2.40. And they were so happy by getting those $4 and $5 a mile loads. But then when I added it all up and added up all the miles, they were averaging somewhere like $1.80, $1.90 a mile. And because they took that, they were afraid to take a loss on a low paying load, but ultimately they cost them the whole week. They could have made thousands and thousands of dollars more by taking what they at the time called cheap freight. But it wasn't. I mean, most of the stuff then we'd be happy to get right now. And it was good money, good paying loads, especially out of some of the areas coming out of South Florida and things like that. So there's a lot of things where you focus on one little bit, trying to avoid the loss on one little piece of your business, and you risk everything else.
I think people, if they learn how to buy into this loss aversion thing, I don't know if you noticed, but when I first came over to you, I used to really get upset when I tried to get out of New York and stuff, and sometimes I'd sit that extra day just because I gave up making phone calls. That hasn't happened in quite a while. As a matter of fact, when I book a next load, it's pretty quick now. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but I think if people understand the concept and they can plan and figure out their numbers as they go, like, I knew I was at a 264. I knew that if I took $1 a mile, I'd still be well over $2.30 a mile, and I would have made over $5,000 to the truck. Instead, that load didn't exist. I wound up finishing the week at it was a 250-mile deadhead to Joplin, I believe is what it was, 4,800 for the week. But by knowing the numbers as you go, you know what you'll need to make going into a dead area, and then what you'd be willing to take to get out, instead of just, oh wow, this is paying $3 a mile, I'll go to Florida, and once you get there, this is too cheap, I'm deadheading out. That sort of thing. Once you know your numbers and you understand that that feeling in your stomach is human nature. Better decide, forget about it, and rationalize it. It's easier to make money.
And ultimately, that's what it comes down to is, and I'm reading an article here while you were talking here, and one of the examples that they give, we are more upset about losing $10. You drop a $10 bill, you're more upset about that than you are happy about finding $10. You find $10, you're super excited. You found $10. You're gonna go buy yourself lunch with it. If you lose $10, you dwell on that all day long. You know, it's a psychological thing. People are so afraid of losing something that they forget about the benefits of gaining other things. And yeah, absolutely. There's so many subconscious things. And this goes back, all these little tips and, you know, things that I've been talking about, the ZOPA, the anchoring effect, and now loss aversion. All of this stuff is like subconscious things that you do without even realizing you do them. And if you can learn how to overcome them, or even better, learn how to turn them around and use them to your benefit, that is the key to really, really good negotiation. But you hit it again, knowing your numbers and understanding the benefits and understanding the lanes, understanding the rates. If you don't know your number, you don't know what you need, you don't know what you'll lose. So if you absolutely don't know what you'll lose, you're so afraid, because like I said, statistically, the gain, the potential win has to be about 2 to 2.5 times more than the potential loss. What happens if you don't know what the potential loss is? If you don't know how much you have at risk? If that's the case, you're not willing to risk anything. So knowing your numbers is, it's huge. You have to know your numbers, or all this psychological stuff doesn't work if you don't know your numbers.
I mean, even if you know your numbers, it works. But what you have to do is first know your numbers, second, understand the psychology of it, and set it aside.
Exactly. And learn when to recognize what's happening, and weigh out everything logically, not emotionally. That's really the key, is to stay in the game logically. Separate the people from the problem. Focus on moving the freight and making the right amount of money versus trying to win at a negotiation and beat your, and I know you don't like when I call it an opponent, but when you are trying to negotiate with somebody across the table, it's a game that you're playing, and just like playing checkers, they are your opponent. You have to try to overcome what their psychological tactics are. It is a game. And so the opponent in your negotiation is throwing their tricks at you. And people naturally have some of these things that they do. Naturally, and some of it are learned. Some of these things that they do are just what they think they're supposed to do. They don't know how to negotiate, but it's what they maybe saw somebody else do in a movie. For example, lying. Well, that's all I have in it. That's just a flat lie, but it worked for somebody in a movie once. It worked for the last broker that they talked to, what have you. So if they have that type of training and you can overcome those tactics, you will be able to win against your opponent. And I posted something a few weeks ago. It's not always win-win negotiation. Oftentimes, people think win-win negotiation means that you have to cave to what your opponent is giving to you. You have to make them feel like they're winning, and if you get your rate and you're happy with your rate, you win. So that is most people's opinion of win-win negotiation. So when I talk about building relationships and win-win negotiation, a lot of people think that right off the bat, that means, well, in order for me to build a relationship, in order for me to have a win-win, I have to take a lower rate. I have to do less. But that's not the case at all. And the phrase that I used the other day was not win-win negotiation. That's wimp-win negotiation. That means you are caving. You're not building a relationship. You're letting them dominate you. You're letting your opponent win so that you can possibly someday come, groveling back at their feet, begging for scraps. And that's not what you want to do. A real, true win-win negotiation is when you both play the game and you both are able to come to a mutual agreement where neither of you has to feel like subconsciously you cave to the other side and you both feel like you won in that negotiation. That's a true win-win. And you don't have to take lower rates. You don't have to cave and do the other side favors. What you have to do is overcome the psychological barriers of things like loss aversion and the anchoring effect and land in that Zopa, but to be able to lead your opponent to the winner's circle, so to speak. In other words, you want to phrase your questions, phrase the things you say and how you say them. You want to try to get your opponent to answer the questions for themselves. You want it to be their idea to give you what you want. That is how you have a win-win negotiation, because then you got what you want. They gave it to you. They gave it to you willingly, and you're happy, they're happy, because you led them to that answer. You showed them that that was what they wanted.
Well, see, and that's why I kind of disagree with the word opponent across the table. When I grew up in high school, I was a bad sportsman. When I lost, I'm hyper-competitive in everything I do, and I really didn't want to shake people's hands after I lost. So if I view them as an opponent, I can't bring the best negotiation to the table. If I'm a friend, not necessarily a friend, business associate, look at it that way. Not necessarily on the same team, but ultimately we're moving something for a third party, and we're doing it together. I find it easier, and I don't have that nasty tone in my voice. I don't get angry anymore if I look at it as a business, and we're sort of on the same team, not an opponent. Another example. One of your customers, what I try and do is I try and help them on certain lanes. I know I can get out on the other end and do it for a reasonable price. Maybe able to deck some of their product and put something else on the truck to generate more revenue. Ultimately, the end goal, the end game on that is to hit them up on one of the longer runs at a much higher rate into markets, say like Miami or something like that. Coming from New York, if you get 4,400 or something like that, it's not unheard of, but it doesn't happen often. And when you take care of a customer on some of the other stuff that they find difficult moving, you hit them up once in a while on a higher rate on a longer run.
Exactly, and the real key though is when you get your numbers and you get them to give you that rate not because you. And the name of the book that Dave and I are both referencing is called Never Split the Difference. So if you don't split the difference and cave to what they want from you, if you have your number and you get your number, that is really how, and getting the rate into whatever market and understanding what the market will bear and understanding how to play the game. And, I like to call it an opponent just because I really think that you're both playing the same game, just as if it was checkers or chess, and you're both trying to win at this game. And a true win, though, is, I guess, in some respects, a partnership or a collaboration between the two, because a true win, you do both win the game. Negotiation is one of the few games you can both be competitive at, but you both win at the end and both get what you want. There is no really a winner or loser unless you just literally walk away from the negotiation altogether and you don't make a deal.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got.
All right. I actually have, we're getting toward the top of the hour, but I do have something I want to address here in one of the comments on the Facebook. But thanks for calling in, Dave, and we will talk to you soon again, I'm sure. Okay, so Arturo's World said there's a book on investing that talks about all these principles. And there are a lot of books on investing, a lot of books on negotiation. A lot of those, though, only break it down into very basic, very low-level negotiation tactics. I've recommended most of these books before, and I do think that this is where everybody needs to start. You need to start with Dale Carnegie's book, written in the 1930s, called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's how to communicate with people. Every book since, every single book on negotiation, on sales, on marketing, on everything written since then references how to win friends and influence people, either by name or by principle. Like one of the lessons in that book, every book since breaks it down. And most books, they take one of the points or lessons from that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and they wrote a whole book on it. How to Win Friends and Influence People is probably the most important book. I think it should be required reading in like middle school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, something like that. It should be required reading, and it should be a book you read over and over, once or twice a year. People should read this book, especially if you're in business or negotiating. How to Win Friends and Influence People. The next level to that would be William Ury, and I can't think of his co-author, but Getting to Yes is the name of the book, Getting to Yes. And that has all of the most basic negotiation principles about, things that I've said before. A lot of the things I've said before about, keeping the positivity flowing and the yes, people answering yes, but that's very basic. At the basic level, getting somebody to say yes, and that's ultimately what you want to do to close a deal. Do we have a deal? Yes. That's how you want to do it. But that sounds like a sales pitch. Everybody has had that telemarketer. Hey, I'm from such and such travel agency. You love to go on vacations, don't you? There's only one answer to that, and it's yes. And it's a sales pitch, and you know it the second they ask you that question. Yes. And that is the tactic that they're using. They want you to continually say yes. It's because they want you to say yes to their deal or their offer. The next level to that is get them to agree and get them to say yes without using the word yes. You want them to say no. And it's another psychological trick. You want them to feel like they're in control. You want them to deny agreeing with you. And there are a lot of ways to do that as well. So you want to ask questions. You don't want to disappoint your customer, do you? No, I don't want to disappoint my customer. You're hired. We have a deal, right? That kind of thing. You need to, that's the next level negotiation. But How to Win Friends and Influence People. #1 book by Dale Carnegie. 1934, I think it was written. Still applies, everything in that book. Getting to Yes, all the basic principles. That is your elementary school. Definitely need to read that if you're going to negotiate anything. If you haven't read either of those books, start there. The book that Dave and I are and there's another one that talks about haggling and tactics of really overcoming, which really emphasizes all the points in that Getting to Yes. There's a lot of books about habits and books about different psychological things you can do based on those books. But they're very, very elementary, and it's when you start to realize the psychological effects that these things have. Now, these books were written 90-some years, almost 90 years ago. They're all still relevant, but people are catching on. People understand, that yes tactic, like the telemarketer. People get that. It's like the flu virus that is starting to grow immune to the vaccine. It still kind of works, but not as effectively as it would if you improve the vaccine. Well, you want to improve the vaccine, you need to learn some next level negotiation. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about here. The book that I and Dave have been talking about, and this is somebody that I would like to reach out to. His name is Chris Voss. The name of the book is Never Split the Difference, Negotiate Like Your Life Depends on It. And I watched one of his YouTube videos. I read the book, watched one of his YouTube videos, and in one of his YouTube videos, he says he was an FBI negotiator, and that was his background in negotiating. He was an FBI negotiator, and he says one of his first jobs was a bank hostage situation. They had 4 hostages. And his words, he says, you can't walk into that and say, I'll tell you what, you have 4 hostages. Let's just split the difference and call it a day, right? Never split the difference negotiation is the type of negotiation that we should be doing in freight negotiations. It's a transactional basis. We got to learn the win-win negotiation, but we have to learn it in such a way that we can build solid relationships and get the other person to want to work with you again. All right, so I'm going to change gears here really quick, talking about knowing your numbers, and we'll wrap things up with this. So Big Rich says, one thing that always gets me is when you're figuring your numbers, and I'm going to do a video just specifically on this, maybe just a short little 10, 15-minute video, because this is a pet peeve of mine. One thing that always gets me is when you're figuring your numbers, the norm is to set it at like 2,500 miles a week. 100,000 miles a year, 48 or 50 weeks a year. What if you fall short on that? Absolutely. That is what gets most people. And then Columbia Glider Dave says, I plan to run 125,000 miles a year. My goal is $2 per mile to the truck all miles. I seem to be able to balance it out between weak and strong markets, good and great freight. Number one, never, ever, 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 ever set a target for your mileage. That is a huge mistake, because I know for a fact, because Columbia Glider Dave is leased to us, his truck was in the shop for about a month this year. I don't know if he's going to be able to get his target rate on miles or not. He's actually down right now. If he did some videos, he's having some belly boxes installed on his trailer, and we'll get some work done on his truck. I don't know if he's going to get the miles. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But he doesn't know either. His truck could break down, and he could be out of work the rest of the year. You cannot break down your cost per mile on an estimation. Now, the first year in business, you have to kind of make some projections, but a cost per mile needs to be done in actual miles. I mean, there's just no way around it. And you could do it for the year, you could do it for the quarter, for the month, for the week, but it needs to be on actual miles. Ideally, you have multiple years in business, you keep a running tally for multiple years and break it down, and you can always run reports. If you have the right accounting software, I love QuickBooks, but TruckLogix can do a lot of this as well. If you break it down, and QuickBooks is obviously not trucking specific, but you can run some reports and do the math, run the miles, plug it into a spreadsheet, what have you, and you can figure out what your cost per mile is. But do it on actual miles. You have to make some projections early on. I have taught people how to use miles as a somewhat of a projection, but the problem is when you start projecting on a mileage basis for the year, when you start negotiating rates, let's say today you have a 700-mile run you're negotiating on, and you know your cost per mile, but tomorrow they offer you a 200-mile run, which could potentially be equally as profitable, but you don't know. I mean, yeah, at the end of the year it might average out, but should that run, if 700 miles pays $2 a mile, should the 200-mile run pay $2 a mile? So should one run pay $14 and the other pay $400? Is $400 a day enough? There's a time factor. We know there's a time factor. If you buy your truck and you park it in the driveway and you don't touch it ever again for the whole year, is there expenses involved with that truck? You still have a truck payment. You still have an insurance payment. The only thing you don't really have expense-wise are your variable costs, which is going to be mainly your fuel and some maintenance. You might even have some minor maintenance. You might have to wash your truck and so forth. You might have some minor maintenance just sitting there, but the majority of your variable cost is not there. You have a fixed cost. So what you really should learn how to do is break down your variable cost, know what your fuel economy is, know what your variable cost per mile is, and your maintenance cost. If you're running a glider or an older truck, that maintenance cost should be 10 or 15 cents a mile. Your fuel cost, if you're at 7 some odd miles a gallon, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 cents a mile right now. So you're at 60 some cents per mile variable cost. Your driver pay is going to be in there somewhere. It could either be a fixed cost, maybe a daily rate for your driver, or mileage based. Let's say it's 50 cents a mile plus some taxes and so forth, might be another 60. So your variable cost could easily be $1.10 to $1.20 a mile by the time you add up your fuel, your maintenance, your driver pay, your taxes, and workman's comp, those types of things. That could be that. But you still, if you don't move at all, it doesn't mean you don't have expenses. And what a lot of people get hung up on is they start looking at they need that principal negotiation of, and this is where it bites you. This is where the loss aversion comes in. They need that principal rate of $3 per mile because that's their number and they won't budge from that. So they sit in Denver, Colorado, and they sit there for 2 or 3 or 4 days waiting for that $3 a mile. So if you need $3 a mile today to go 500 miles to a better market, you need $3 a mile today. Doesn't that mean that you would need $6 a mile the next day? Not necessarily, but you do have some fixed costs there. Another thing you can't do is you cannot just justify a rate to a broker based on a missed opportunity cost. So does it cost you the same to go 700 miles as it does to go 200 miles? Absolutely not. So if you get $1,400 or $1,200 or $1,400 a day for $700, should you get $1,200, $1,400 a day, 200 miles? There's no way to justify that. So you have to have a formula somewhere in the middle to know a basic price of what it's going to cost you to sit there all day. Somebody calls you and they just want you to move a load across the street. You just move it 1 mile down the road. You're going to have to do that for a few $100s per mile. That's what it's going to take to be profitable on that run. If it's going to take you all day and you can't pick something up until the next day. You need to have some kind of a daily rate, and there are ways to figure out basically what that is. You got to make some estimations, but you still have to make some, projections and estimations on when you're quoting loads going forward. But you always, when you want to know what your actual cost per mile is, always want to use your actual mileage. So if you drove 993 miles or 99,993, you know what I'm saying? You drove that many miles, that's how many miles. You take your total cost, you divide it by the 99,993. That's your actual cost per mile. It's not a rounded off 100,000 or 120,000. It's your actual miles. When you're quoting that next load, that can be your kind of your base number on what you absolutely have to get to be profitable, to break even rather. But you need to know what your daily cost is to just sit there. So most people I found, you lease to a carrier or so forth, it might be between $150, $200 per day just to sit. So if you needed, if you're looking for $3 a mile today on a 400 mile run, that's $1,200. But your cost for that day is about $200. That means you got $1,000 minus your variable cost, and so forth comes out of that. But if $200 is your cost today, you needed $1,200 to go 400 miles today. That means tomorrow to go that same 400 miles just to break even, you're going to have at least $1,400. And that's probably not going to happen. If you couldn't get $3 a mile today, what makes you think you're going to get whatever it works out to $320 or something, $325 or whatever it is? You're not going to get it. All right. All right. I believe we've wrapped things up. We've gone a little bit over time. Truck Pro, you can get startup for $150. I'm not real sure. I think Truck Pro or whatever it is some software. Is that right? Benjamin Duke says Truck Pro startup for $150. Like I said, I really like QuickBooks. QuickBooks Online is super handy. You can get the cheap version. It's like $12 a month. Has the app on your phone. You can take pictures of your receipts at point of sale. It's super handy. You can get the desktop version. It's a one-time buy. It'll last you 3 or 4 years before you have to upgrade. But of course, it's all on your desktop. And then the other one that I recommended was TruckLogix. TruckLogix is super, super inexpensive, which is why I recommend it. I think it's between $7 and $8 per month for a lease driver. I think $8 a month you can create invoices and so forth. So if you were independent and you had your own authority, you need to create invoices, like $8 a month, and it does all your basic accounting. It will sync to QuickBooks if you need more than it's capable of, but it is pretty much capable of everything trucking related. So it's a really, really good program, and it's super inexpensive. There is absolutely no reason at all not to have some type of program in place to know your numbers, know your accounting. I was talking to another compliance company, and he was telling me that when he's working with new carriers and new owner operators in general, and the last 47, I believe it was, that he asked about, he was telling me that 2 of the 47 had a pretty good idea or knew their numbers. 2 of them. One of them was a little sketchy because he just wrote it down in a notebook, but he could figure it out. One of them was pretty confident, but one of them was a little, but he knew it. There was about 5 that kind of had some numbers. They could have went home and put their receipts together and figured it out in a fairly short order. But out of 47, 7 of them had some basic, very basic outline of what they needed to do. The other 40, absolutely no clue. Absolutely no clue. That's insane. No clue. So Number one, know your numbers, and I promise you, you will be ahead of the game. You will be ahead of your competition, which is all the other trucks and other owner-operators that are trying to negotiate. You will be better off. You will be a pleasant surprise to the brokers that you work with. Absolutely know your numbers. Learn some of this stuff. And then I'll wrap up with just a couple more quick comments based on what I was saying. I figure mine on 100,000 miles a year, but I run automotive freight, so I know 4 weeks a year I won't be working, 2 weeks changeover, and 2 weeks end of year inventory. I also try to get fuel price per mile for all miles. Don't always get it, but it is what I try to get. And again, even if you know you're going to take 4 weeks off, you're still estimating on your miles. You're still estimating 100,000 miles. And you might be on something that's fairly dedicated. But it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult because especially if you're running spot market, you don't know day to day what you'll be offered. If you're on something dedicated, you can kind of set a budget and you can set some projections and you'll be a little more accurate. But on the spot market, you don't know tomorrow what you'll be offered or if you're offered anything. So you should have a pretty good idea of your cost just to sit or to deadhead out. If you're in South Florida and Miami, what's it going to cost you, not just in fuel, but your time to get out of Florida, to spend a whole day driving up to central Georgia until you get to the next load. I also always try to get my fuel price per mile for all miles. You don't always get it, but it is what I try to get. And another little bit of a misconception on fuel price. Fuel price is always built into your rate. It's always, whether you get a fuel surcharge or you get just a flat rate, your fuel is always part of your rate. Fuel surcharge is part, and people get confused on fuel surcharge because it is only a part of your rate that is put in contracts long-term to adjust for the compensation, the difference in fuel price. So on a spot market load, you negotiate on that one load to move from point A to point B today. The fuel price today is what the fuel price is today. There should be no fuel surcharge on that load. I understand brokers will break out a fuel surcharge, but I'll tell you what most brokers do. They'll say, you'll book a load $1,000, and they'll say, okay, $900 for the line haul, $100 for your fuel surcharge. That equals $1,000. That's close enough. They don't have a formula. They just fill in the blanks in their system and they print a rate confirmation. So I see a lot of people saying, I should get 100% of the fuel surcharge. Well, your fuel surcharge comes out of thin air. Your fuel surcharge doesn't mean anything unless you have a calculation on what your fuel surcharge should be. And it doesn't matter what the customer pays, what the broker pays. You aren't working for the shipper or the broker. If you're leased to a carrier, you are working for that carrier. You should have a contract with the carrier on what your fuel surcharge should be. And if you're doing just spot market loads and negotiating your own stuff, there wouldn't be a fuel surcharge. So you got to be very, very careful with that. So Benjamin Duke, I'm going to go back here. So Truck Pro, get it for a startup for $150. He recommends Truck Pro. He said it's a TMS invoice, cost, profit by mile. Apparently it's a contact, I guess you can save your contacts in there, contact manager, and a document saving per diem IFTA spreadsheet. So apparently it's a TMS, which is a transportation management software, tracks your loads. You can put all your load information in. You can create invoices from that. It will generate the report so you know your costs and your profit by mile. Contact manager, so if you do work with a broker and so forth, you can put all their phone numbers in. Doc saving, which means I'm assuming you can upload your documents to pair them up with your load information. Your per diem, which I'm assuming if you go out for a certain number of days, it will tell you how many days you were out to help calculate your per diem. IFTA, it will help you based on the routes that you ran. It will calculate your IFTA. And I guess it does that through spreadsheets. And I'd imagine most of the stuff, which is true with most similar programs, most of these reports can be exported as a spreadsheet into programs like Excel. One thing about using software like that for IFTA is it's not compliant. It will not be compliant. In order to be compliant, you actually have to have odometer readings from every state. You're supposed to have trip sheets. You're supposed to have or a monthly mileage record. And you're supposed to have, and what the TMS will do for you, however, is create your routes. So you can pull all of your routing information from a TMS. But you still should have some reporting. If you use an ELD and so forth, should still be able to pull that information to do your proper IFTA. All right. That being said, I appreciate that. Benjamin Duke recommends the Truck Pro. All right. And I think I see what Jack of All Trades says. $3.32 is the current fuel price in Illinois. And a couple of lines before, he says, I always try to get the fuel price per mile for all miles. Don't always get it, but it is what I try to get. So $3.32 per gallon is the average fuel price in Illinois. So that's what he tries to get on his rate per mile. There is absolutely no correlation to the cost of fuel and what your rate per mile should be. I don't see why you would do it that way. There is no correlation to that. Your fuel price is a percentage of the fuel cost, is a percentage of your rate, has zero to do other than that small percentage of your rate. $3.32, it would be great if you get $3.32 for all miles. But I can tell you that your cost is not $3.32 per mile, and I can tell you that as a broker, you would not be able to justify most runs, you know, especially just general freight runs. If you're doing flatbed or you said automotive, if you're doing something a little unique, that might be. But I've heard this before. Try to get the cost of fuel as your rate per mile. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And no offense to you, Jack of All Trades, but there is zero correlation to the cost of fuel at the pump and what your rate per mile should be, other than a percentage of cost. And your fuel cost is somewhere in the neighborhood of typically for most current rates right now 25 to 30%. So if your fuel cost if the fuel cost went up, you know, 4 cents per gallon overnight, then your rate per mile might only increase about a penny a mile. So there'd be no justification. So if it went from $1 a mile up to $4 a mile, or a gallon rather, there would be no justification to increase your rate that much because it only went up a percentage. So, and I understand it's just-in-time automotive is what he's saying, and it's great if you can get a rate like that, but in my opinion, that is bad advice because there is no correlation. What you should be trying to get as your minimum number is your actual cost per mile needs to be your walkaway number. You don't want to run for a loss. Market depending. Coming out of Florida, you might run for a loss, but you would have made that going in. So get your money going
90 seconds.
Holy cow, that was loud. So get your money going in, and I about jumped out of my pants when she said that. But all right. That being said, she has spoken. The show is over. It is close to 8:30. Thank you all for joining me. Still not sold on the YouTube platform, but it worked out pretty well this time. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for following me around to whatever platform I end up going to. If you are following me on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the thumbs up. I don't even know what all this stuff does, but I need some interaction with these videos, and I need to try to start getting everybody on this platform so that I can start pushing out some real good information. And I'll continue doing these live shows over here for a while, and we'll see if it grows on me. In the meantime, thank you all for joining me. Remember, dream big, aim high, strategize your plan, earn your success because you don't deserve anything. You got to earn it. And remember, only you drive you. Have a good night, everybody.